I never thought living in a peaceful countryside neighborhood would mean getting fined for feeding my family. But that's exactly what happened when the HOA decided that the sound of my cow mooing at sunrise was disruptive. Mind you, we're not talking about a packed suburb. This is a rural neighborhood where most people own chickens, goats, or a tractor or two. Still, I woke up one morning to find a bright orange violation notice slapped on my barn door. Apparently my cow was disturbing the community harmony, and that's when I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Stick around, because this story gets crazier. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more insane HOA tales. I moved out here to get away from all the noise, both literal and bureaucratic. After living in the city for most of my adult life, I was done with traffic, sirens, concrete, and rules stacked on top of rules. So when I found a 5-acre property just outside a rural community, with actual space, trees, and neighbors who waved but kept their distance, it felt like peace had a price, and I was finally willing to pay it. We weren't exactly full-time farmers, but we had a garden, a few chickens, and one cow, Daisy. She was a gentle Jersey, nothing fancy, but a dependable milk producer and practically part of the family. My kids would brush her, my wife made homemade butter, and I handled the early morning milking. Rain or shine, 5:30 a.m., I'd be out there with my old stool and a pail, listening to the crickets fade out and the birds start up. It was the kind of peace I thought I'd never get in my lifetime. For nearly a year, that was our routine. Not one complaint. Not one problem. Then one morning, I walked out to the barn, and something looked off. It wasn't Daisy. She was chewing, calmly, waiting. It wasn't the sky, still that soft purple-gray before sunrise. It was a fluorescent orange slip fluttering on the barn door. At first, I thought it was a delivery notice or some kind of misplaced flyer, but when I got closer, my stomach sank. Notice of violation, unauthorized livestock activity and noise disturbance, fine, $150. Underneath that, in bold, ongoing milking activities have been reported before 7 a.m., disturbing the peace and comfort of the surrounding residents. Cease and desist immediately, or be subject to further daily fines. I stood there for a long second, trying to process the absurdity. Daisy let out a low moo, and I actually laughed, like she was reacting to it too. I walked back inside, holding the paper like it was radioactive. My wife read it twice and said, "Since when is owning one cow unauthorized? We're zoned for agriculture." Exactly. I had checked everything before buying the property. Zoning, livestock ordinances, state regulations. And sure, our community had an HOA, but it was supposed to be light touch. The kind that only cared if you left junk in the yard or let your house fall apart. That's what the realtor had said. Mostly inactive, just keeps the neighborhood tidy. Turns out the board had recently gotten a new president. A guy named Mr. Stanton, retired military, wore khakis to mow his lawn. You probably know the type. He moved in 6 months ago and, according to the grapevine, had been tightening up the rules ever since. I ignored the notice at first, figured it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone misfiled a complaint meant for a louder neighbor. Maybe Stanton got carried away. I even told myself not to escalate. But I did write a polite email explaining that Daisy was legally allowed and that milking her wasn't some act of rebellion. It was just morning farm life. I included zoning codes and a copy of the county's livestock guidelines. 2 days later, I got a response. Not from Stanton directly, but from the HOA secretary. "Thank you for your concern. Regardless of county guidelines, the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, override local ordinances in matters of noise and residential conduct." They added a PDF with a highlighted section that mentioned persistent early morning noise caused by residents, animals, or machinery, which the board could deem a nuisance at their discretion. In short, it didn't matter what the law said. The HOA had decided mooing at 5:30 was a problem, and now it was a billable offense. The fine wasn't the issue. I could pay $150 and keep going. But that part about daily fines? That felt like a trap, like they were daring me to challenge them, so they could rack up hundreds, maybe thousands. So I reached out to a few neighbors. One older couple down the road said they'd gotten a similar notice about their rooster. Another family had been warned about their kid's basketball hoop making too much noise before school. Seemed like I wasn't the only one under the microscope. It was clear the new board president wasn't just enforcing rules, he was inventing them, and hiding behind fine print to do it. Still, I tried to play by the book. For 1 week, I milked Daisy later, right at 7 a.m. But it threw everything off. The kids were late for school. The milk was harder to keep fresh in the sun. Daisy got antsy and kicked the bucket over twice. Literally. That's when I realized something important. The problem wasn't what I was doing, it was who was watching. Wasn't about noise, it was about control. And if they were going to come for me over a cow, I needed to be ready. I wasn't going to fight dirty, but I was going to fight smart. Before I did anything, though, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Not to cool off, no. I was looking at yards, specifically violations. The kind that get overlooked, overgrown bushes, trash bins left out, unpainted shutters. One house had a broken fence for months. If the board was going to fine me for mooing at dawn, maybe it was time to look at how consistently they were applying their precious rules. And that, right there, was the moment I decided to push back, with precision. Let me tell you what happened next. It wasn't just about Daisy anymore. The first fine was annoying, but I could have swallowed it. What pushed me over the edge was the second notice, delivered just 3 days later. This one wasn't taped to the barn. It was hand-delivered by a smug man in cargo shorts and a clipboard, wearing a ball cap that read "HOA board," like it was a military rank. Stanton himself. He didn't even knock. Just strutted across the yard and dropped the envelope on my porch like he was delivering a court summons. I stepped out right as he turned to leave. "You could have just emailed," I said. He gave me that tight, condescending smile. The kind you only see from people who think paperwork is power. "We find that formal delivery makes expectations clearer," he replied. I opened the envelope as he stood there. Another fine. This time for non-compliance with a previously issued violation. $300. "You know this is nonsense," I said. "The board disagrees," Stanton replied. "You've had ample opportunity to adjust your routine. My cow doesn't work off a clock, and we're zoned for livestock. Zoning doesn't override the HOA charter," he said. "If it continues, we'll proceed with lean escalation." And with that, he walked off my property like he'd won something. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules or community comfort. It was a man on a power trip trying to build a fiefdom out of lawn regulations and noise complaints. I wasn't going to fight him with shouting matches or passive-aggressive signs. I was going to beat him at his own game. With the one thing HOAs fear the most: paperwork and publicity. The paper trail he started digging. Not into the dirt, but into the documents. Every page of the HOA's charter, guidelines, amendments, and minutes from the last 2 years. All public, all buried in the HOA's clunky website. What I found? Gold. See, Stanton and his board had passed a rule 6 months ago, redefining excessive noise to include animal vocalizations deemed disruptive during quiet hours. But here's the thing. Quiet hours were listed as 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant my 5:30 a.m. milking technically fell within the quiet time frame. Okay, that part was true. But they never defined what disruptive actually meant. No decibel range, no objective measure, just vague language that gave the board total power to decide who was too loud. But the real kicker? They applied this rule only to livestock, nothing about barking dogs, power tools, or those wind chimes one neighbor had hanging outside her patio that sounded like a haunted church bell. So I asked myself, why was Daisy a problem, but a dozen barking dogs weren't? I emailed the board a formal request for clarification. Then, I filed a petition under the HOA Charter's dispute clause, which, fun fact, forces a mandatory review if at least 5 homeowners back it. So, I walked door to door with copies of the violation letters and a friendly question. "Have you ever been fined for something ridiculous?" Most of them said yes. Basketball hoops, overgrown grass, even one guy whose holiday lights were left up too long. By the time I was done, I had 12 signatures. I submitted the petition that Friday. The board now had 10 business days to hold a hearing. While I waited, I got to thinking. What if the neighborhood really heard Daisy? No, not through her mooing. Through me. I called my cousin Dave, who owns a portable speaker company and lives about an hour away. I asked him if he had anything unreasonably overpowered. He laughed and said, "You mean something that would be illegal at a music festival? Absolutely." 2 days later, a trailer pulled up outside my barn with a monster PA system on. It, Bluetooth compatible, fully self-powered, and very, very loud. I didn't use it right away. No, I was smarter than that. I waited for the HOA meeting. They scheduled it on a Saturday afternoon in the community center. Standard HOA stuff: lemonade, cookies, a half-dozen bored neighbors in plastic chairs, and Stanton at the head of the table like he was running a court. I was allowed 5 minutes to speak. I brought a folder, some printed photos of my property, and, this was key, a USB stick. When it was my turn, I played a recording of Daisy mooing softly in the morning. It played for 12 seconds. Stanton blinked. "What is that?" "That," I said, "is the sound of my cow. The same sound you claim is disruptive." Some neighbors chuckled. Others looked confused. Then I pulled out my decibel meter app and showed them a reading I had taken the day before. Daisy's moo clocked in at 63 dB, quieter than a lawnmower and almost the same as a human conversation. I turned to the room and said, "If that's too loud for our rural neighborhood, then we better start fining every barking dog, gas trimmer, and Sunday mower." The board didn't say much, but I could see it on their faces. I'd come prepared and I wasn't backing down. Stanton's move, few days after the meeting, I got a final letter from the board. No apology. Just a bland statement saying my violation had been reconsidered and waived after community review. But I knew what that meant. They had no legal leg to stand on, and the noise excuse had collapsed under scrutiny. Still, I wasn't done. That Sunday morning, right at 7:01 a.m., I rolled the speaker trailer to the edge of my yard, aimed it toward the community center parking lot, and hit play. It wasn't music. It was a looped recording of Daisy mooing. Again, 63 decibels. No higher than the real thing. It ran for 3 minutes, just long enough to make a point. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors laughing. Someone even shouted, "Long live Daisy," from across the road. I didn't get a single violation after that, not one. What started as one fine became the catalyst for something bigger. But I wasn't quite done, not yet. After the board meeting and the speaker stunt, I thought maybe the HOA would retreat quietly into their little rulebook bunker. Maybe Stanton would simmer down, realizing his attempt to micromanage a mooing cow had turned into neighborhood comedy. But I underestimated his ego. 3 days later, I received another letter. Only this time it wasn't a fine. It was a request for mediation. Apparently, Stanton was willing to discuss a peaceful resolution to ongoing disturbances, but only if I agreed to permanently relocate Daisy to a barn further from the main road and commit to standardized milking hours. They wanted to regulate when I could feed my own animal. I almost laughed. But then I noticed something at the bottom of the letter. A line that said, "Failure to cooperate may result in the HOA pursuing external arbitration under Neighborhood Policy 7.3.1. Now, that caught my attention, because Policy 7.3.1, I'd read that already. It was vague. Something about binding arbitration in the event of unresolved community impact violations. Vague enough that Stanton could try to push the issue further, even beyond the neighborhood. So, I made my next move. The media finds Daisy. I didn't call a lawyer. I called a friend. My buddy Tyler works in local radio. Small time, but he loves a ridiculous HOA story. And I figured, why not put this nonsense in front of people who'd appreciate the absurdity? He showed up on a Saturday morning with a mic and a grin, ready to record. We stood by the barn with Daisy calmly chewing in the background, while I told the story from the beginning, fine by fine, meeting by meeting, down to the mediation letter. He asked me, "So, do you think this is about the cow at all?" "Not really," I said. "It's about control. The HOA wants quiet mornings, but they don't seem to care about barking dogs or power tools. It's about who gets to make the noise, and who they want to silence." The segment aired on Monday afternoon. By Tuesday morning, the phone didn't stop ringing. 3 local stations wanted interviews. A regional paper emailed asking for photos. And then, because nothing is truly local anymore, a viral HOA subreddit picked it up. The headline? HOA fined this guy for milking his cow too early, so he fought back with science, speakers, and sass. Overnight, Daisy became the most famous cow in the county. I wasn't the only one tired of the HOA. The attention did something interesting. It emboldened the rest of the neighborhood. People started speaking up. One guy 2 streets over, who'd been fined for parking his RV for one night, wrote a long post on the community Facebook group about selective enforcement. Another neighbor dug up proof that Stanton had altered the HOA's rules without a full vote, something technically against the bylaws. The comments started rolling in. Why are we letting one guy decide what animals are too loud? If he hates country living, maybe he should go back to the city. Free Daisy. Someone even made t-shirts that said "Doctrine Justice for Daisy" and sold them at the farmer's market. I bought 5. And while Stanton tried to pretend none of this was getting to him, still patrolling the streets in his golf cart like some suburban sheriff, the pressure was building. The final showdown, at the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. Easily triple the normal attendance. People brought folding chairs. Someone brought kettle corn. A neighbor live-streamed it on Instagram. I was on the agenda. When my turn came, I walked up with a stack of documents, zoning approvals, audio decibel logs, the original HOA rules, and, just for fun, a framed copy of the viral subreddit post. I read a short statement. This isn't about noise. It never was. It's about one person trying to turn a community into a kingdom. I came here to live free. You can't fine nature. You can't fine a cow for being a cow. And if that bothers you, maybe you bought in the wrong zip code. I set the frame down in front of Stanton and sat back down. There was applause. Real applause. Not rowdy but solid. People were tired of the games. After some awkward silence, another board member, the treasurer, cleared his throat and spoke. I motioned to dismiss all noise-related fines issued in the past 6 months and recommend we revise Section 4.2 of the noise policy with clearer standards. Someone seconded it, then they voted. 2-1. Motion passed. Stanton sat stiff, red-faced, the only dissenting vote. The fines were dropped. The threats of arbitration disappeared. Daisy stayed where she belonged. A month later, Stanton quietly resigned from his position on the board, citing personal stress. He still lives in the neighborhood, but he doesn't speak much, or smile much either. The new HOA president? My neighbor Jen. The same woman who had the wind chimes. She promised transparency, real votes, and no more war on livestock. We even had a little block party 2 weekends later, complete with hay bales, music, and a booth that sold ice cream made from Daisy's milk. Someone brought a speaker and played cow sounds just for fun. Daisy? She handled the fame like a pro, just kept mooing, eating, and doing her job. No noise complaints since. So what's the moral of this tale? If you're gonna live in the country, expect a few cows. And if you're running an HOA, remember, you're not a king. You're a neighbor. Sometimes all it takes is one ridiculous rule to show a whole community that they've been too quiet for too long. And if it takes a cow to break the silence, so be it. Make sure you're subscribed for more HOA tales like this one. Because where there's a rule book, there's always a ridiculous story.